Syria. The West is lying about Syria, and they're using the media, the mainstream media, to push their lies, and it needs to stop. This is one of those stories that I hope that you share out to people that are fairly ignorant about what has unfolded in Syria over the past couple of years. Because if you watch CNN, you're going to get one narrative that's been totally debunked, totally false. And the reporters and anchors and the corporate media should be ashamed of themselves for pushing this, because it's led to the death of tens of thousands of people, thanks to this false narrative. So what's new this week in Syria? Well, this week, a chemical watchdog group now says that Syria did, they say that Syria did use chemical weapons on civilians in 2018 in the city of Douma. Now, this was the event, of course, this chemical weapons attack in Douma, that prompted the United Kingdom to join the United States and France in bombing the hell out of Syria and destroying this country, this beautiful country with beautiful people. But this is the same watchdog group, by the way, that had whistleblowers leave and accuse them of a cover-up to justify the war on Syria. So you had whistleblowers within this organization that said, wait, this whole thing is a cover-up, and here's what happened. Of course, it was silenced in the mainstream media. This same group is now coming out saying, yep, Syria used chemical weapons. The mainstream media has done an amazing job of gymnastics on this. Back bends and warrior, and downward dog, all sorts of gymnastics, and bending over backwards, basically. Not to mention this part of the story. Not to mention the whistleblowers. Not to mention the cover-up. The debunking of this. So we are going to fill in the gaps for them, since the mainstream media sucks. We're going to fill in the gaps where their blinders fell off, if you will. So first of all, why is Washington waging this war in the first place? Why in the hell? How many of you even know? I mean, you're a smart audience. All of the tens of thousands of you watching this show hopefully understand this, that the United States has been actively bombing Syria for years. Why? Like, most Americans who aren't watching this show are like, really? We're in Syria? Why are we bombing Syria? Why are we in Yemen? Why are we in Somalia? Most people don't even know. So why is Washington waging this war? Foreign policy analyst Stephen Gowans lays this out in his book, exactly why. It has nothing to do with democracy at all, like we're spreading democracy. It has nothing to do with that at all. It has everything to do with money. So I'm going to read a quote from Stephen Gowans' book, Washington's Long War on Syria.
There it is.
He writes, on behalf of Wall Street, the United States' most politically influential sector, successive U.S. governments waged a war on Arab nationalist Syria, not to support the spread of democracy, which Syria's Arab nationalists had developed to a far higher degree than had Washington's prized Arab allies, but to eliminate opposition to a Washington-led global economic order which prioritized the pursuit of profit above all other considerations. So we here in Syria want other things. We're not concerned about profit. We're concerned about the prosperity of our own population. We're not like you, Washington, D.C. We're different. Can you imagine that? Well, that doesn't sit well with Washington. So he lays out in his book how the U.S. has been after Syria for many reasons, since Bashar al-Assad's father, Hafez al-Assad, in the 1960s. Why? So to put it simply, the Baathists support Islamic independence. This is also called secular Arab nationalism. And Syria, to anyone who understands Syria, is a country that is welcoming to all religions. It's actually a melting pot of religions, and where it's openly shared and loved. Talk to anyone who's from Syria, who lives in Syria. That's what the country was famous for. We don't like that, I guess. And so Baathists support Islamic independence. It's also called secular Arab nationalism. They want Arab resources for Arab people also. And they want to use it to bring education and bring health care, and they want prosperity for their population. And that means no U.S. competition in the region. None. Think of what that could do if it were to succeed. If the U.S. and all of their garbage were kept away. According to Gowans, he writes, Baathists such as Bashar al-Assad, the president, threatened the United States and its Western allies in distal and proximal ways. The distal threat presented by Assad and other Arab nationalists related to their aspiration to unify the world's approximately 400 million Arab speakers into one single large state with control over the Arab world's vast petroleum resources. This state, which would combine the sophistication of Cairo, Damascus, and Baghdad, with the oil wealth of the Arab Gulf states, would be large enough and rich enough to challenge U.S. hegemony in West Asia and North Africa. Moreover, he says, an Arab superstate, basically. It would become an Arab superstate. So the oil wealth of that region, like if the U.S. was pushed out of it, it would basically crush the U.S. hegemony. So the U.S. doesn't like that, right? The U.S. wants to hang on to U.S. dollar reserve hegemony through war and other means, no matter what.
Well, it's really rich of the United States to be like, we want democracy all over the world, but it's like we put this country or these people in a position where they have to make a decision like this. Like they don't have a choice. Yeah. It's either let us come in, let us destroy your country, let us take all your resources, or figure out a way to stop us. We're forcing them to do this. And the more we do what we do around the world, this is going to happen more and more. There's going to be more people uniting against what we do.
Yeah, and we're already seeing that, right? We're seeing this alliance of the BRICS nations. But, and you're right, and the real thing is not the weapons. I mean, that's a big piece of this. We've been bombing them for years, of course, but it's the economic sanctions.
See him back there?
And as Vanessa Beeley wrote in a report in December, and Vanessa, by the way, amazing journalist, she's going to be on the show tomorrow. We were talking today about the sanctions, and she's just saying, it's absolutely crushing to the Syrian people. You don't understand,
I could point out a few other things
monthly
too, but
salary
I'm not
for a Syrian is like equivalent of like $27. They can't.
Well, think about
the only way they can buy fuel is on the black market, and I think it's like 30 times that amount just to buy a little bit of fuel for it. They don't have fuel. They don't have energy. They don't have anything because of the sanctions.
Think about there are certain states that we do this to, or countries that we do this to, that have a more a stronger middle class, so they can sustain some of the sanctions, right? So Russia's sustaining it. There's other countries that can sustain it, but these countries are not like wealth-driven countries. So
right.
they're already poverty. They can afford. They get their food. They get the things that they need. But if you get into that at all, you're taking literally life-saving supplies away from them, and these sanctions will kill people. Now, like I said, other countries can withstand it, but they can't.
Yeah, like Iran can withstand it and has been. Mm-hmm. Russia absolutely has actually prospered under it, but yeah, Syria has not. It's been absolutely soul-crushing. People freezing to death. With no fuel, thanks to Western sanctions. All because we want to have our stamp in that area. And of course, we lie about it. We absolutely lie about it. Wake up, people. Please share this video out with people. Like, we are liars. The West is a group of liars, and they're killing people.
True.
And if more people can band together and share this, we might make a change in the world. So, you have big business, right? So big business leans on Washington in this, to clear the way for that in these areas. To say, hey, we want to have access to these also. The United States, you got to clear the path for us through military might or sanctions. And then Washington abides by this, ripping Syria to shreds and backing the al-Nusra, which is, of course, al-Qaeda-backed government opposition. So they are religious fundamentalists. So the U.S. aligns with religious extremists in order to topple governments they don't like. So, yes, the United States has been funding and supporting al-Qaeda in Syria for years. For years. And people say, no, that's not possible. It's not possible. The hell it isn't. We're literally giving them money and weapons. And this has been going on for years. Well documented. And on the one hand, you literally had al-Qaeda and ISIS being funded by both the CIA and the FBI differently in the same country at the same time. Good.
Well, and you go back, this has been for centuries, because even if you go back to the Indian Wars and stuff, in America, they used Indian scouts and things to help find people, and then once they use them, once they're done with them, they just turn their backs on them, and then they just become another enemy.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened right now. We're seeing the very same thing happen. And then what will happen is, once we're done using you, we'll bomb you, which is exactly what's happened in Afghanistan when we've turned our backs on these people. And by the way, why do you think that so many of the weapons funneling into these areas are winding up in the hands of these al-Qaeda fighters who are now making their way and now are fighting in Ukraine, which we've covered here on the show? Yeah, Al-Qaeda fighters who we funded and supported and weaponized in Syria are fighting in Ukraine. CNN will never cover that story, ever. BBC will never cover that story, because they're all complicit. So, yes, the U.S. is funding and supporting Al-Qaeda in Syria. And for that, you know, to cover all of this, you need a public relations squeeze on this, right? You need, like, the media to be complicit in this. You need public relations reasonings for going into Syria. You need to be able to figure out a way to spin this, and that's exactly what Obama did. President Obama went right for this when he took office. He called for regime change because he said that al-Assad was a murderous dictator who is feared by his people, which is the exact opposite of the truth, but okay. Here is his administration in 2013. Watch.
Assad regime's inhuman use of weapons of mass destruction against innocent men, women, and children
unleashed hellish chaos and terror on a massive scale.
And if we don't stand up to it, we'll face it more, and they will think they can intimidate anybody.
Straight to the breaking news. If Bashar al-Assad yields control of his chemical weapons to international authority, are we back from the brink? Is military strike on pause?
Absolutely, if in fact that happened. I don't think that we would have gotten to this point unless we had maintained a credible possibility of a military strike, and I don't think now's the time for us to let up on that. So what I've said specifically is I want to make sure that that norm against use of chemical weapons is maintained. That's in our national security interest. If we can do that without a military strike, that is overwhelmingly my preference.
Oh yeah, right. He says that with a straight face. Yeah. You know, lying right to us.
Well, and that rhetoric is still being used today. That rhetoric was used to try to take down Tulsi Gabbard. Like, so they still, even though there's proof that never happened, they still use it.
Yeah, of course, because, you know, again, it's the Mark Twain quote, right? Like a lie can go halfway around the world before the truth has a chance to put on its pants. And once you say that a Bashar, like to somebody like who's not paying attention or is uneducated and just hears like Bashar al-Assad in Syria is gassing his own people, well, Obama told me and I saw it on CNN, so it must be true. They showed video of it. Faked. Yeah, well, but they showed it, and I believe it.
Well, it is funny because, like you say that, like I consider myself fairly educated, and it wasn't until we covered this like several almost like a year and a half ago when we first started talking about like this, and I was completely unaware that had ever been even addressed, that Assad did not drop the chemical weapons on his own population.
That's amazing.
And, I mean, it's like I know, and it's like I feel like I take in a lot of news, and I was still under that assumption, and so it's because I just never heard contrary.
And that's what we do on the show is try to, you know, like we're all learning on a regular basis, right? We follow the facts wherever they go. And I think to all of us who heard that initially, you know, the idea is, okay, well, I guess we believe our government. They're going to tell us that this guy, this murderous dictator in Syria is gassing his own people. Okay, all right. I guess our government's looking out for us. So I guess.
Yeah. Everyone's so full of shit. All right. Leg leading up to her waist, her ass, her waistline, comb titties, arm coming back this way, holding her tail. Her face is up here, eye, nose, mouth, hairdo rolling back. And because my telescope was not perfectly centered, we're going to lose this bottom portion in a second. That's why I'm pointing this out. I might catch it at another angle, no big deal, but this is going through my telescope too early because I'm not centered. So we're going to watch her face come through, because what I'm looking at is her hairline. There's several of them, and it goes back to the timeline. And as the timeline moves through in a waxing moon, just like all the other images, that's why I'm watching the timeline. But we're not at the timeline yet. It's just still coming to the screen right now. millions of images within images. Watching these images out here are what I'm telling you about knowing which way the moon moves, that it's turning in a clockwise rotation throughout our sky. It doesn't do the spinning with pear rocket ball shuffle like they tell us. Yeah, her hair is gonna flow back. Her best angle is actually somewhere over here, if I remember correctly. Let's see. And you get this canine face that no one ever pays attention to. You got him on this side. Got a lot of light coming in the window. Trying to get her better. Let's see. Somewhere around there. And I also could do this too. Hold on. Red filter. Red filter on top of a green filter. Let's do this too. There you are. Right. Anyways, all right.
No. And Philip's a highly educated person. Just admitting that. Like, you know, I think how many people have been duped by this over the years. So to be clear, the Assad administration did fight back against Al-Qaeda, al-Nusra, as any government would, and as any government should, when they have a regime uprising. We're not speaking in defense of any government here, simply putting it that the West has been justifying a war on Syria with lies. That's it. This much is irrefutable. So, and now to the recent report out this week. The media tells us that a group called the OPCW, or the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, has concluded that chemical weapons were used in 2018 in a town called Duma. Now, the report says the OPCW had determined that use or likely use of chemical weapons occurred, but that they had not reached a final conclusion, end quote. They were looking into 2 yellow cylinders that were apparently dropped on 2 residential buildings, and are saying that they think it was dropped from a Syrian Arab Air Force helicopter.
Nice.
That was their justification. They say this about their conclusions. This is from the OPCW report. The IIT reached its conclusions on the basis of the degree of certainty of, quote, reasonable grounds, which is the standard of proof consistently adopted by international fact-finding bodies and commissions of inquiry. In reaching its conclusions, the IIT carefully assessed the information obtained from the FFM, states, parties, and other entities, coupled with interviews conducted by the IIT analysis of samples, munitions remnants, gas dispersion models, cylinder drop trials, computer modeling, satellite imagery, authenticated videos and photographs, as well as advice from experts, specialists, and forensic institutes, along with other relevant materials and sources. They looked at over 19,000 files, amounting to more than 1.86 terabytes, obtained and obsessed 66 witness statements, 5 of which were from women, and considered data related to 70 samples. They then assessed this information holistically, scrutinizing carefully its probative value through a widely shared methodology in compliance with best practices of international fact-finding bodies and commissions of inquiry. In so doing, the IIT adhered to applicable OPCW procedures, including with respect to what goes on. They say here that the Syrian army did not cooperate in this investigation, and why would they? At this point, they've been snowballed and sandbagged, and I mean, think about it. I don't know any other version. Railroaded? I don't know what the other... Anyway, internal memos from the OPCW suggest that the chemical weapons canisters were likely placed at the site of the incident. So listen to this. Internal memos from the OPCW suggest that the chemical weapons canisters were likely placed at the site of the incident, suggesting an inside job from American allied forces. End quote. In fact, according to those who bothered to look at the story, senior OPCW officials reportedly ordered the removal of all traces of dissenting opinion from the published document. So we get the document, all of that is removed. Oh, so the cylinders didn't look like they were dropped from a Syrian Arab helicopter at all. They were placed there. Oh.
I wonder if they were placed there by the
Let's erase
CNN
that.
journalist that had the scent, that had that smell on her backpack. You remember that?
Oh, yeah. Or Barbara Starr, who went there from CNN, and was like, yeah, this is what, yeah, pushing this garbage. So no media covered this leak. No one covered it. No one covered that the OPCW whistleblowers had called attention to this. One journalist, though, did try. Tariq Haddad quit Newsweek when they would not let him publish his expose of this. Newsweek wouldn't let him publish it, so he quit. Here's Piers Robinson, Dr. Piers Robinson, co-director of the Organization for Propaganda Studies and formerly chair in Politics, Society, and Political Journalism at Sheffield University, running down the problems with this investigation back in 2019. Watch.
The anomalies was first and foremost the idea or the kind of explanation of how the cylinders had arrived at their locations was unpersuasive, to put it mildly.
Just to clarify that for you, how did they arrive and how was it claimed that they arrived?
The OPCW report clearly indicated, implied that the cylinders had been dropped by helicopters, that they had fallen into apartments, and that's where the chlorine gas had leaked from. Number two anomaly was that the deceased civilians at location 2 in the apartment block, the OPCW investigation found that only the chlorine was present, okay, so therefore implying that these people were killed by chlorine, but the report also noted that they appear to have died due to some kind of fast-acting nerve agent, okay, because chlorine doesn't kill rapidly. So you had a stark inconsistency in the report in terms of how the people had died. The third big problem were the hospital scenes. I mean, we knew, because Riam Dalati from the BBC has claimed, and still continues to claim, the hospital scenes were staged. And you look at the Duma report and there are indications even there of staging the hospital scenes. So you add all those things together and you've got a lot of very serious questions about what really happened and increasing ultimately the probability that it was a staged event.
And that's a big claim.
And that's a big claim. And then, of course, the key thing is that you have the OPCW report coming out, and then within a few weeks of that, you have the leaking of an internal engineering report carried out by people who were a team in Duma, and that was leaked, and it was obviously leaked to us, and we published it. But that report was essentially the opposite conclusion of the OPCW report. The conclusion was that the cylinders were most probably put there by hand, not by dropped by helicopter.
Yeah, totally convenient, isn't it? And just leave that out of the report. So I spoke to Kevork Almasian, who's a Syrian journalist, and he's covered this extensively in my conversations with Kevork. We talked specifically about the problems with the OPCW. Listen.
They're saying there is a sarin gas attack there, and people walking there without masks and sandals, and they're asking what's wrong, because they don't know what happened. And if there was a chemical attack, a sarin chemical attack, and if we calculate the wind direction, for example, the entire town should be dead.
Right.
and not 40 people or 50 people of a sarin gas. That would never happen. And in 2018 is the same. In Duma, alleged chemical attack happened that I think it never happened. There was no chemical attack in Duma in 2018. But the OPCW final report indicated that the cylinder that the chlorine gas came from was from a helicopter of a Syrian army that dropped that cylinder. And then the whistleblowers came from the OPCW, Jan Henderson and the rest of the team, who were on the ground in Syria investigating, and they said clearly that the administration of the OPCW, under pressure from the United States, they took out an entire paragraphs from the final findings of the OPCW to make it look like government did this, the Syrian government did this chemical attack or alleged chemical attack there.
So that's Gabor Kalmassian from Syrian Analysis, and a friend of the show and an excellent journalist. So despite all these questions and problems with the report, does the media leave any room for these nuances? No, they don't, of course. They condemn Syria unequivocally. Here is the Guardian's headline. Syrian regime found responsible for Duma chemical attack this week. And I love that they're washing a baby. You know, they're like washing a child. A photograph, reportedly a child being treated in a hospital in Duma after a suspected chemical attack. Here's Washington Post coverage. Gives the report the final say. Syrian army responsible for Duma chemical weapons attack, watchdog confirms. And I love that that photographer gets right up close on that cylinder.
Okay. I mean, if I was a war correspondent and there was an unexploded ordnance, and particularly a chemical weapon, I would be right up in there. I'd like be taking serial numbers, getting etchings, you know, just anything I could.
Right up on that sarin gas canister. It's just gently placed there on top. Very nice. The Post says that any information that indicates this was not Syria is Russian-based disinformation. That's what I love too, right? So if you follow the facts on this story, then you're a Putin apologist. You're a Putin support. What the hell does that have to do with what? What? No, if you're following the facts, you're following the facts and you're getting to the truth of the story. It doesn't make you a Putin apologist. It doesn't make you a Russian-based disinformation expert. It's ridiculous. Here's how the Post puts it. The United States, Britain, and France retaliated days later. It's amazing that they retaliated so quickly. They launched a rare salvo of airstrikes against Syrian government targets. But in the months that followed, Syria and its Russian allies vehemently denied that Assad's forces had been responsible for any chemical attack. International weapons inspectors struggled to assess or access the two sites in question, and the incident became a magnet for Russian-backed disinformation. Thank you, Washington Post. Democracy dies in the dark. Actually, democracy dies at the Washington Post. Reuters, Al Jazeera, they all covered the story in the same way, with no mention at all of the controversy surrounding the OPCW. It's amazing how they just left this part of the story out. Whistleblowers at the OPCW talked about how this was all staged. Okay. Aaron Mate puts it this way, journalist from the Gray Zone. Aaron Mate says, how can every major outlet covering the story deem the OPCW cover-up allegations not even worthy of a mention? If they believe whistleblowers were wrong, they'd happily acknowledge them and say so. But they know they can't, because the leaks are damning. Hence, their memory hold. As for what these loyal stenographers are missing about the OPCW's new effort to double down on the Duma cover-up, the cover-up they can't bring themselves to even mention. Stay tuned. So why would the media do this? Is it laziness or is it purposeful omission? And if the whistleblowers are credible and the canisters were placed there, is someone else, some other government power getting away with this? We'll leave that up to you, dear viewers. Who's to blame for this? What government agency do you think would have the cojones to pull off something like this? Maybe we should ask JFK. Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. Gas shortages will cause families to freeze during a heatless winter. Blackouts are becoming the norm, and energy rationing is taking place. This certainly doesn't reflect
This
our
is a
modern era.
moon
In
video
fact, the
that I
truth
just
is,
did the
we're
other day.
behind in energy technologies, but not because of a lack of ability or knowledge. No, this was intentional and orchestrated over the past 100 years by those who had the power to suppress and redact information as they see fit, to keep us in the dark. Welcome to Redacted History. I'm Clayton Morris. Well, there's no denying it. We're in a man-made energy crisis, ultimately designed over the decades by power-hungry governments, wealthy politicians, special interest groups, big oil, and greedy energy companies that are making record profits, billions off of our fossil fuel reliance, while the general public suffers the consequences of what decisions were made for them, self-serving decisions that were not in the best interest of the people. It didn't have to be this way, though. Things most certainly could have been done differently by embracing alternative energy sources 100 years ago. Now, you may be thinking, wait a second, we're actually embracing alternative energy sources right now. We're working hard to implement solar technology, wind turbines, other non-fossil fuel energy alternatives, as well as a big push for electric car use. But it just takes time to get a solid system in place, right? Yes, that's true. We are working to implement these alternative energy sources, but the data shows us that renewables only account for 3% of output of energy. And all of that solar and wind need to be backed up by natural gas and hydrocarbons. So the solar wind scam might just be nothing more than that, a scam, a lie. But what if there was something else out there? Not nuclear, which is currently the best form of clean energy, not oil, not solar, something else you've never heard of before. So this is where the truth unfolds for those who are unaware of our history as it relates to energy discoveries. And this may come as a shock to you, but various technologies for free non-fossil fuel energy sources were actually being developed well over 100 years ago. For instance, something called etheric energy was discovered, and the technology to capture and convert it into usable power was developed over 4 decades ago. Never heard of it? Well, you're not supposed to. So what is etheric energy? Well, in its basic form, it's energy that nature provides that can be extracted from the atmosphere, the air all around us, and has the ability to be converted into usable forms of energy. Along with this, at the same time, wireless transmission of electricity that's directed through the atmosphere and utilizes the Earth's electric force as a conductor was being researched and tested, with the end result being light bulbs wirelessly illuminated 25 to 26 miles away from the power source. Think about this. No power lines. Light bulbs 25 miles away from the power source turning on. This was an incredible advancement in energy technology that was way before its time. What may surprise you even more is the fact that the beginnings of electric car technology came into existence in 1839. Electric-powered cars were in development and put into use in the mid to late 1800s. There are even images of fleets of electric cars plugged in and charging. Electric cars were so popular that President Woodrow Wilson owned one, loved it, and drove it all around Washington, D.C. The batteries in these cars used salt, much different than the current lithium-ion technology. Other alternative energy developments at the time included a wind turbine that was built in 1888 that proceeded to power a house successfully for the next 20 years. And if that wasn't enough, the first U.S. solar panels were installed on a rooftop in New York in 1884. Yeah, that's worth repeating. Solar panels installed on a rooftop 138 years ago. Okay, so knowing that all of these alternative energy ideas were discovered and in existence over a century ago, you can even imagine how advanced these technologies would be today if they were allowed to progress, unfettered, consistently perfected year after year over the course of those 100 years. The bottom line is that these renewable energy technologies were pushed out of the limelight for decades, hidden from all of us. Dare I say, redacted. I mean, does anyone remember reading about solar panels in school back in the day? Because I don't. I do recall reading volumes of information on coal, gas, and oil, though. Why were we not aggressively building upon these various renewable energy sources all along? Could it be that they just don't quite fit into our capitalistic system that those in power profit from? The answer lies within our history, And you realize this as we jump back in time for a moment to a year when the first American oil well was drilled in 1859. And as a result, we see the creation of one of the world's first oil barons, John D. Rockefeller. Rockefeller successfully created an oil monopoly and became one of the richest men in the world, and the rest is history, and sets the stage for the path that we would be on for the next 163 years. Dependence on oil, suppression of alternative energy sources, wars, and people in power that control the narrative to keep its dependence in place. There are more stories to tell regarding coal and other fossil fuels, but I think you get the big picture. So, over a century ago, we had a profitable fossil fuel industry blossoming, and on the other side of the spectrum, there were scientists, physicists, and engineers who had a whole other focus. They were brilliant individuals who were discovering alternative ways to harness and create energy. And we touched on some of those ideas. However, they're worth elaborating on. Buckle your seatbelts. Because with that said, we take a journey into the past so we can have a closer look at some of the most notable alternative energy ideas that never had the recognition they deserved. Let's start this journey through history by highlighting the work of Nikola Tesla, whose ideas and research, if had been allowed to progress, could have changed the 20th and the 21st century as we know it. Most people would never know this, though, because Tesla was wrongfully pushed into the shadows of Thomas Edison when it comes to our history. Tesla began his work with etheric energy in the late 1800s, which included his plan to harness the energy that's located between the Earth and the upper atmosphere and convert it into usable electricity. Tesla sums it up perfectly himself when he says, quote, "This new power for the driving of the world's machinery will be derived from the energy which operates the universe, the cosmic energy, whose central source for the Earth is the sun."
Yeah, I just want to say I'm playing this video, but this is all bullshit because they were all liars. Even Tesla was a fucking liar, so just want to point that out as I'm going along. We can all see it all for ourselves. Tesla brought us a magneto, an alternator, big fucking deal. It's all, he really gave us the electromagnetic ability of the system. The true creator's work has all been hidden. But it's all around us. We can all take the system back if we want it. I don't know that anybody wants it, but I'm just saying that because I don't really like listening to anybody really anymore because they're all so full of shit. And they're pushing the same shit they've been pushing for thousands of years. Maybe he realizes it, maybe he don't. I don't know. Seems like a nice guy.
Sun, and which is everywhere present in unlimited quantities. Tesla had hundreds of energy-related patents, and one in particular, which pertains to etheric energy, was patented in the year 1901. It was labeled an apparatus for the utilization of radiant energy, and didn't require an external power supply to operate. It was simply powered by nature's invisible elements. With the etheric energy, it pulled out of thin air, and while being grounded to the earth, his device was able to provide power to electrical devices. When describing his device, because he explains that it operates on radiant energy from the sun, it gives the impression that he's describing what we now call a solar panel. However, he goes on to state that it also utilized, quote, other sources of radiant energy like cosmic rays. And perhaps the most important thing that he says about this technology, quote, night will not interrupt the flow of a new power supply. The disappearance of the sun below the horizon will not shut it off. So as you can see, Tesla's invention was similar, but different from a traditional solar panel. Solar panels are made of expensive materials, are produced with silicon and other rare earth minerals that make them hard to get out of the ground and almost impossible to recycle. In contrast, Tesla's device used a simple insulated metal plate, but the biggest difference was the fact that it didn't stop working when the sun went down, which is one of the reasons solar panels of our time can't fulfill our energy needs. Not even close. They can really only supplement them, help a little bit. Tesla had intentions of developing and expanding on this invention, but because he didn't have the funds or the backing, and as you can imagine, the energy companies couldn't even allow the slightest possibility of his developments interfering with their already established and profitable energy system, it was never developed further. Okay, now I'm going to move over to one of Tesla's other energy projects for a bit, because I feel the story as a whole reveals a lot when it comes to how monopolies come into play when profit is concerned, as well as the government having their eye on things, with their finger on the suppression button. And I'll begin by heading back to both the late 1800s and the early 1900s, the Gilded Age. Now, at this time, Tesla researched, developed, and tested something that had the capability to create enormous amounts of energy that didn't need wires to travel. This was something he called a magnifying transmitter, which was an adaptation of his Tesla coil, and it utilized the Earth's electric force and atmospheric elements. With this technology, Tesla had a dream of providing free power to the world. He stated that he had the plans to create limitless power by harnessing, magnifying, and distributing the electrical energy located within the Earth. He felt that this could be done by tapping into stationary waves, the electricity created by the Earth's vibrations, allowing him to send energy through the Earth and the air. Now, he had plans to use his magnifying transmitter for telecommunications purposes by creating an electrical system that would be able to send light, voice, images, and power by using a wireless transmission system. Sounds a bit like an advanced version of the internet that didn't take off.
It's the reverse of advanced. It's the reverse of advanced. It's what he's just describing is what I've been describing to you. It's the true creator's work, and they're not letting us actually tap into the true creator's work. We're already into it. They've taken it away from us, going further and further bio, not telling us about the system, lying to us about the true creator and who he is and what he's about. Trying to send the slaves. And I just wonder, how deep does it go? Who knows about it? Is this guy that I'm listening to right now? Is this guy that I'm listening to right now, Clayton Morris, am I wasting my time making series to him? Is he someone who will never awaken? He's got millions of viewers, millions of subscribers. And I've called out others over the years. It's been 5 years now, and no one's coming out. Candace Owens, I just predicted under the Candace Owens series, not that this is a big deal, because the prediction just comes, they tell us what they're going to do. They just make it sound so crazy that no one will believe it, and then they go forward with it. I was saying in the Candace Owens series that they're going to break up the states, and Michelle Obama and Hillary will come in on one ticket, and Trump's going to take the other ticket with, whoever. Most likely Tulsi Gabbard will be on with Trump. And they're going to divide the states, and we're going to get hit by some major shit. It's going to be a whole different thing now. I don't know if it's going to be a full reset, partial reset. Who knows? But it seems like they are going to go forward with it. But I was saying that, yeah, that's going to be the breakup of the country. So these guys, I don't know, everybody you listen to, they all seem to be full of shit, but they're nice people. If they really did mean well and they were trying to do the right thing, that would be one thing, but I'm not sure of that or not.
For almost another 100 years in the 1990s, or even cell phone technology. Sound familiar? Well, a twist in the story, because telecommunications is what he was funded to do, but his main ambition was to provide the world with free power. Now, to do this, Tesla formulated that if a magnifying transmitter could be constructed at a large scale, enough to send electricity through the ground and the atmosphere across a long distance, then a system of power-generating stations could be placed around the globe to distribute practically free wireless electricity anywhere in the world. He was so confident that this would work that he had a goal of lighting the 1902 Paris Exposition by shooting energy through the Earth and the atmosphere from his magnifying transmitter that would sit on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. The media, of course, caught news of his overall plan, and a newspaper reporter wrote, quote, "All monopolies that depend on power of any kind will come to a sudden stop. The Earth's currents of electricity are to be harnessed. Nature supplies them free of charge. The cost of power, of light, of heat will be practically nothing.